I'm Charlie, Meghan. We co-CEO the company together. Probably the best way to describe the way we work is probably even minutes before we just came down, we were arguing about what slides to put in, take out, add new things. It's almost like a reporter and an editor. So I'm the reporter where I just want to write and keep begging Meghan, like, let me just talk longer. And she'll say, you need to tone it down or else they're not going to hear anything. And so we end up working in this fashion. So editor, reporter, if there's a perfect amount of slides and content, it's all because of Meghan. If there's way too much, I kind of got a little bit of my way. So
you go off script, but
that's true, which I do a lot.
Go off a little bit.
Just really quick, I'm curious, just show of hands, who here has young kids? So parents, young kids, Boston too, right? So I'm asking the question because there was a New York Times article talking about how in the 20th century, when rule following was one of the most important skills, parents were in total control. So rule following was the most important skill, parents were in total control. In the 21st century, dictating no longer works. Telling someone to go do something can actually have the opposite effect. In fact, they found in the millennial generation, in the, now the centennial generation, rejecting authority figures is literally the celebrated, in their view, the right thing to do. So the fact that you mandate it, dictate it, the fact that you write a rule means you're probably going to get the exact opposite. And that sort of is what happens with parenting as well. So, and I mentioned this because you're all here, different organizations in different ways, you're all leaders, meaning you need to get people to go do something, accomplish a mission, drive revenue, spend less and be more efficient. It is so hard, harder than it's ever been. And rules and things are changing so fast. Anything we share, in our view, we're not even able to see the halfway mark of where we need to get. So we are changing, and we have never given the same presentation twice. We've shared so much knowledge. In fact, this is the skeleton of a course Meghan and I are teaching in 2 weeks to the newly promoted 2-star generals or admirals in the Navy. And it'll change from here as well. So we'll try to take you through, it's around 10 slides in here. And then with the 10 slides, I'm going to move to the whiteboard and try to get more into the how, the practical detail. I think there's a part where you can hear theory, you can hear why this is important, all that stuff, which is all great. But end of the day, when you go back on Monday, you have real work to do. And you have real problems coming at you. And I'm hoping you can walk away with a few tools and strategies that might help you try things in a different fashion. Now, I always say, if you're here and something is working brilliantly for you, just keep doing it. But if you're getting stuck and you're unsure in that notion of why bother because it's impossible, I'm hoping there are a couple things that we discovered that we can help share. Now, one of the interesting ways of where we got to where we are with all our knowledge was in the most unusual way through the act of giving. The culture tours you've been on, we've been doing it for over a decade, 3,000 to 4,000 of them a year. So, I mean, you're talking about a tremendous amount of organizations who've gone through. We ran this Leadership Academy for the first time 6.5 years ago. It's been pro bono all the way since. And so there's a very long wait list of people who want to come, and we get the selection of finding those right people. We always say the right people have this component of better me, better you, meaning they're highly competent, but good from within. Sort of a rare combo that shouldn't be so rare, but it is. You find a lot of very competent evil people, and you find a lot of very good people, but not so competent. So we screened for those two criteria, demonstrated high competence, demonstrated good from within, and we ran and gave away everything we learned as rapidly as we could, as we will today as well. And if we add value the next 3 days, and this is what we've done for years, the people who found value came back saying, I want to give you something back. There's something I've learned. I wrote a book, but parts of it are wrong. Here are the parts that are wrong. So just the amount of information that came back to us from every imaginable industry, it turned us accidentally into a think tank on the subject of people. Never something we only wanted to run our company, and in the process of everyone coming back from Olympic teams and medical doctors and military and CIA and nonprofits and startups and Fortune 500 companies, the amount of knowledge that travels through these walls and our offices is beyond what you can imagine. So I'm going to share some of the interesting things. There's always more and more. And then from there, we'll hopefully move from less of the theory, but more into the practicality of how and what to do. That sound fair? And if you find no value in the next 3 days, at least walk away being a little bit healthier. You'll eat healthier, you'll get sleep class, you'll get exercise. So in the very least, you might at least walk away physically feeling healthier. So I hope at least you get that. If not, I do apologize for taking 3 days and wasting your time. I'm going to talk about this 100-year change, calling it the movement. There is a change occurring in every single organization. We saw the first signals of it showing up in 2015, and it showed up in two government organizations, the CIA as well as the DoD. So the Defense Department as well as the CIA, both heads that year, coined memos talking about the modernization of the workforce and future force. The notion that the number one most strategic initiative within the firm, within their organizations, is around people. Now, we work with a lot of, what you guys in the military call industry, for-profit companies, think tanks and whatnot. And I turned to them and said, if government is putting this as number one, oh my God, is everyone in trouble? Like we're way behind. And that was in 2015. Things only accelerated since. And the best illustration story of this is looking at this company called Tesla versus Fisker. So there's an individual we got to spend time with. His name is Jack Hidary. He ran for mayor of New York, and being one of the bigger tech companies in New York, we spent a lot of time with him. And he happened to also work at Google X, sort of the innovative labs group. And he shared something that dates back to almost 2010, 11 that was fascinating. I had never heard of Fisker. Some of you may not have. But to go back in history, these were two companies going after trying to change the future of cars, of automobiles, to move from gas to electric. And Fisker was the company who took the safer route. They built the car that when it runs on electricity and you run out of electricity, it flips to gas. It's kind of that hybrid solution. Tesla said, if we're going to change the world, we're going to stop using gas and move straight to electricity. Every expert, every analyst, anyone who had any kind of PH something or a master's expertise of any sort said Tesla is going to go out of business and Fisker is going to succeed. That was, it wasn't even close. Yet this guy, Jack Hidary, said, our team ran an analysis in Google. This is going back way before, Tesla took off, saying there were signals we saw that Tesla was going to win and Fisker was going to lose. We analyzed the number of Google employees departing Google to join Tesla versus Fisker, and there was a ratio of 20-1. Google representing high quality talent. For every one employee who left Google to join Fisker, 20 joined Tesla. And his point was, from that point and from that data, you could tell who was going to succeed and who was going to fail. And lo and behold, Fisker went bankrupt in 2014. Tesla became worth more than every auto company in the US, and still is. This notion that when changes occur, and something big, you talk about, there's a joke amongst the younger generation, to make the world a better place, to change the world. Like, my life should have meaning. This notion of when something big is happening, the top talent. Now remember, not all talent's equal. The top talent is attracted to and will get retained in those who lead that change. They don't join number two. If you are the top talent in the market today in the topic of search, and you want to do something crazy in search, you go to Google. If you're interested in, ride sharing, the gig economy with cars, you go to Uber, not Lyft. The top talent will go where the leader and the leadership as an enterprise is. So keep this in mind as we talk more about the movement. So we're going to go into depth about the movement because the number one asset for 100 years in the 1900s, which is also known as the 20th century, was machines. The industrial age. And in fact, they say people were just a piece of the machine. In fact, they kind of looked like widgets in the machine and they were replaceable. Everyone had a number, and if it doesn't work, you just replace them. And head count is a term that came out of that world. In fact, there's a lot of things that came out of this world. Core values is something every organization talks about. You build in culture. If you look back in history, core values originated actually from the industrial age. You needed everyone to follow the same protocol that the leadership or the CEO set, and so therein comes core values. You indoctrinate everyone into the same way to think. Number one asset was machines. People were replaceable. Fast forward 100 years, and I'll talk a little bit more depth in the movement. The number one asset now is people. But this is something that is hard to truly appreciate. I don't think for the last 20 years or even longer, there's a CEO or a C-level leader who hasn't talked about how people are their number one assets. You know, my asset walks in and out of the door every single day. But if you did a true audit of where their money goes, where their time goes, where their energy goes, they will fail that audit because they are valuing oftentimes still the machine, their computers, their systems, less than the people. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is if you look at every leader, yourselves included, what keeps you up at night, when you want to pull your hair out, it's a people issue. Every crippling element, the, oh my God, I can't, when a machine breaks down, I can believe it, right? When a competitor attacks me, I can believe it. When someone inside my own organization does something what I would consider just bad or dumb or, oh my God, I can't believe it. But it happens over and over again. So there's a big change occurring, and every organization is struggling because they've been designed. The culture is what they call the norms. The culture has been designed and has been running for 100 years for a different century. So a lot of the surveys you filled out, one of the top things that was shown in the surveys was this notion of insufficient resources, right? Every one of you is now asked you to do more with less people, less resources, right? We're going to reduce your budget by 15%, but I have more work for you. Right? We're going to cut your head count, but I have more work for you to do. And I have also other duties I need you to take care of, right? Collateral duties, additional duties. In our business, we call it culture. Like whatever it might be, I just need you to do more. And by the way, the demands are higher at home. The demands are higher from friends and everybody else. I just need you to do more. And now the amount of reading you have to consume is out of control, right? If you're a leader in charge, you pretty much have to read a book per day just to catch up in the sheer volume of information you're supposed to be on top of. And if you haven't, you're dealing with old news, old data. The demands have gone very high, insufficient resources we've heard everywhere. We put this together, this pyramid here, as the new hierarchy of needs, because most of us in general, at least in this room and the other office, we're privileged enough to not worry about food and shelter. In fact, we might worry more about too much food. Food and shelter and those basic hierarchies are done enough. In fact, most of us don't even worry as much about physical exercise. You go to wellness conferences, they no longer talk about physical fitness, they talk about mental fitness. There's many things that have been done well enough, or I would call optimized. You're worried about the next thing. So money comes up, definitely. Whether it's as an organization, as an individual, your pay does matter. Then comes belonging, which leads to growth. And then at the very top, we put purpose, mission, revenue, because this is not an intramural sport, it's a high-performance sport. Everything we're doing is to go and produce and do better in mission, better in revenue, if you're a nonprofit, better in your purpose. The whole aspect might be very similar. But most organizations are still used to only one lever, the lever of money. If you want to produce more, I need more money. I need more money to get more headcount, which once again is an industrial age term. I need to go buy more machines, more computers. I need to open another office. I need more money. And I would argue the getting more money and efficiently and effectively spending the money is approximately 90% optimized. Yes, you can squeeze more out of it, but we're doing that pretty damn well. We can always do better, but we're doing it well. But what's under optimized is lever 2. Lever 2 is growth. And what's interesting about growth is there's a notion of stress and recovery, very much like if you ever go to a hospital and you see a screen that looks like this, you know that's bad. But living is up and down with oscillations. When you go work out, you stress your biceps. You're actually putting stress on your bicep, but it grows in recovery. And there's an oscillation of growth and recovery. And this is lever 2. And when you do this well, which is taking your existing headcount, your existing people, and helping them grow, not once, but continuously, you can accomplish this notion of one person doing what 10 people on average can do. When we spend time with the best sports teams, the best hospitals, doesn't matter what organization, the best organizations are spending as much, if not more, in developing their existing talent, making them better and better continuously, as well as looking to hire. This lever 2 is what we got known for. Never intended to be a business. Harvard went and did a 3-year study, and after studying and rejecting the usual suspects, they said McKinsey, who literally they bill for their talent. They train them rigorously so they can bill you more. McKinsey was rejected from this study. Google was rejected. And they said they only found 3 companies that fit the bill, which is the standard they wanted that they called a DDO, an organization wired to deliberately develop its talent, not just the senior leadership, the entire base of talent. So this is what we got known to do well, and we were sharing all the knowledge. Harvard put a spotlight on us at a global level, and the amount of inquiries and requests for academies and culture tours just exploded at an exponential level. So this is what I'm hoping to share, some of what we've learned. So going into human beings, there's a lot of things you can learn. One of the more fascinating pieces comes from looking at the NBA. So pre-2017, the NBA had 3 big issues when it came to referees. Referees were biased, and they would make calls in favor of the home court team. So home advantage, or home court advantage, the home team would get calls in their favor. And on an average NBA basketball game, there's on average 500 calls that are made or should be made by the referee. 500 calls. And they would fall ever so subtly in favor of home court. Calls made in favor of the star players. Kobe Bryant, or LeBron James kind of gets away with a little bit more of a travel, more fouls. And this is something that was predominant and would show up in the data. The other part is racial bias. And I know right now diversity and inclusion is a big topic in companies of all sorts. Racial bias was also very strong. Black referees favored black players. White referees favored white players. And they would make biased calls when you study the details of what happened. So the NBA in 2017 made a very big push on transparency. They put a push into looking at real-time feedback, coaches surveys, video reviews, and they put in a tremendous effort to make everything more transparent so everyone could see what was happening. And the net result of that, these problems practically disappeared. Seemingly, when I say seemingly, it's like fast. Home court advantage, calls favor star players, racial biases, they disappeared when transparency was introduced. Now, this sounds great, which is why let's go do transparency, right? But transparency came with this other side effect, not an easy one. They had to put in tremendous efforts around resiliency training. The chance of referees suck. Home court, they are pissed off. They hate the referees to the point where the referees need to be protected in vehicles as they leave the game because they could physically get hurt from the players who are enraged that the referees didn't make more calls in their favor. Star players are notorious for chanting and talking about how the referees suck, so much that in schools, young kids are also trained to scream, referees suck, modeling after star players. This is not good. Referees had to have resiliency training, how to deal and process with this much hate coming, despite the fact that performance went up, biases went down. The referee, the human referee, is getting calls right 96% of the time. That's pretty damn good. A lot of great things occurred, but this notion of what transparency does is better understood through this video. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's a fantastic study they did on monkeys, and it gives you a sense of what transparency does. Let me just play this really quick. Oh, sorry. Does it not play? I'm trying to think. Let's see. I wonder if the link is not, sorry, technical difficulty. Being a tech company, we have more technical difficulties than non-tech companies, so have some empathy. I think there's a link in there. Maybe the link wasn't copied. Oh, do better. We'll find the video on YouTube. So it was a TED Talk, just to give you a heads up what it is. That was on, I think it's Chupuca or Capucha monkeys. It's monkeys, right? And the punchline I'm going to walk you through and see in the video is that transparency makes people go apeshit. And I want you to think about transparency now with social media, right? And I want you to think about transparency with Facebook and everything else out there. If you think there isn't someone you know who has a better life than you, right? Oh. Better life. Maybe a better looking spouse, better kids, better looking, better, more athletic, academically stronger, socially stronger. Like as far as a career goes, they're getting more famous, they're making more money. The notion that somebody out there is just doing better than you. Sorry.
The final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees. But with Sarah Brosnan, we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests a rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the wall.
shaking the cage, going apeshit. The wall between this is transparency. You know, the notion of Michael Phelps when he, won fly and the guy who had beat him before, like the whole stay in your own lane. It's almost humanly impossible to stay in your own lane. And I love when athletes tell you to and whatnot, which is all great in these extreme examples of Olympics, but let's be honest, we can't stay in our own lane. We're always watching what everyone else is doing. We are social beings and we compare. We compare to each other. So transparency has proven across almost every industry of driving higher performance, and performance matters. But it is not so easy. And that's where kind of the rubber hits the road. All organizations today, now with people, are decision-making machines. We are not only making decisions, we're making a lot more than we ever did. In fact, every one of you, probably in a course of at least a month, but probably even shorter, you're facing thousands of forks in the road. And which choice you make, and then there's the forks you don't even know existed. Every choice accumulates into bad decisions or it accumulates into good decisions. But when it comes to decision making, people don't focus enough on the root element of decision making. Call it sense making. Some call it information, decision making data. Some will call it, something else, but sense making. And you think of sense making in two parts. Decision making data, information that comes from machines. So I use radar as an example, and we have a lot of sensors. In fact, the Internet of Things is about sensors. Sensors are sensing everything everywhere. Reading, I'm gonna have a Fitbit that's reading my heart rate and it's reading my sleep and walking patterns. We have sensors of all sorts in machines. But there's the flip side, sensors in people. Sensors in people where if you ever watch X-Men and Professor Xavier or Jean Grey, if you could read everyone's minds at any given point, don't you think you'd make a better call? If you could read everyone's minds and hear all their voices at any given instance, you'd make a better call because human beings are incredible machines to make sense of things. And not only at the present time, but thinking of the past, looking into the future, and we are all making judgment calls rapidly. There's a Columbia professor who said, no matter what the situation, we are deciding good thing or bad thing at any given point. In literally a moment's notice. Hiring is fascinating because when you hire someone, it's when we are judging another human being, right? Will I bring you into my organization or you do not fit our team, our tribe? They say that men decide on whether to hire or not hire within 30 seconds of the interview. 30 seconds. Now, women take a little longer, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. What happens in the first 2 minutes of the interview? You barely spoke, just the way they look. And that what they said first was enough to basically decide hire or not. That's how rapidly we are making judgment calls. Now, in the research, what's fascinating that showed up was this notion of intuition, human judgment, human calls. They say that it's so powerful half the time. The other half, it's wrong. So you know what people say is, well, you can't rely on human judgment because it's so faulty. Any machine, any sensor that fails half the time is no good. So let's turn to machines. But the problem with machines is this. There's a guy who we met who told us a great thing. Machines rely on data. All data comes from the past. Data is, Tim O'Reilly, big tech guy, said data exhaust. Data is literally what you see from what happened in the past. So if the future looks just like the past, a machine making data-driven decisions is fantastic. The problem is if tomorrow doesn't look like today, you're going to make some very bad calls. And if you look right now, and I face this all the time with our own leaders too, they always seem to be one step behind. I will yell at them on something they had to think about, and the next task is different, but they now apply that formula. And so then you give them a framework for this situation, and they apply it at the next one without thinking, wait, it's a different situation. The problem with data is that it's looking in the past, and if the future does not look exactly like the past, data-driven decision-making can kill you. The only thing that can make sense of ambiguous, complex situations you've never seen before are actually human beings. But what do you do with this 50% of the time because of our biases and blind spots? Our intuition is wrong. This is where team comes into play. If you ever watch the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the single most important lifeline was poll the audience. It is crazy no matter what the topic. You'll never get 100%, but the dominant majority always got the answer right. The power of a team, of the crowd. If you can get all the voices of the crowd rapidly on the table, it's never 100%, but probably 60, 70, maybe even higher, you can make the right call. That is what transparency is. That's what voice and human sensors are. So I'll share with you two stories of human sensors gone right versus gone wrong. So we spent a lot of time helping the CIA, and still do, training their leadership and working through different things. And one interesting person we met was the lead analyst. She was the one who helped capture Osama bin Laden, right? So it's kind of cool to meet people who have done pretty wild things. But what was fascinating was this. I mean, the CIA has they all claim they're insufficient resources, no budget. But what I saw was they have a lot of money. CIA has a big budget, a lot of money. They got every gadget you want to be able to go find this one man. Now, I love the show 24, if you ever watch it, right? It's literally no more than one episode. They find anybody on the planet like that. The CIA for years, they're trying to bribe people they're using, sensors of all types. They can't find this one guy. How is it possible the most powerful country in the world, the most powerful computers and drones and satellites and everything imaginable cannot find one guy for years? So the team, right, led by this lead analyst, they actually met and said, if you look back in history, was there ever an instance like this where the whole world couldn't find something? They went and sought out the original team that found the Titanic and said the same problem occurred for the Titanic. And they literally met with that team. And after that meeting, they found Osama bin Laden almost immediately. And what the team in the Titanic said was, it's around our assumptions. When they were looking for the Titanic, the general assumption was that it broke into two giant pieces. You ever watch the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? So two giant pieces was the assumption. Everyone was looking for two giant pieces of a ship. Somebody then, while on the Titanic searching team, said, what happens if our assumption is not right? Maybe it broke into thousands of little pieces. And the minute they changed that assumption, they found the Titanic right away. Within, I don't know if it's minutes, but within one episode of finding and meeting the Titanic team, they found Osama bin Laden right away. I put it as a human sensor because we all have biases and blind spots. Every organization we've met at some point at this is talking about diversity and inclusion. And in my view, you're talking about the wrong thing. You're talking about diversity of thinking. You're not talking about diversity of skin color, age, and gender. You want people who think differently. You want people who think differently, but the problem is this. By definition, if you have diversity of thinking, you're gonna have arguments because they're gonna be violently on their intuition, hanging on, saying, I am right and you are wrong. And yet that argument, when put on the table, are the data points that will help you make better decisions. So this is an example when human sensors work. This is an example when it did not work. Boeing is going through a lot of difficulty. We spent time with the head of HR at Boeing. We've met different groups that actually got in. Amy Edmondson had to spend time from Harvard. She's known for psychological safety. And when they studied what happened, I'm assuming everyone knows, right? 2 planes down and several hundred people killed, back-to-back 2 planes. Boeing rushed to get the plane done, and many employees say they didn't recognize the importance of the decision. They described a compartmentalized approach, each of them focusing on a small part of the plane. John Hilliard, our CTO in Boston, he talked about just the nature of complexities in systems now. I was a computer science major. When you learn to code when I graduated, you learn maybe 2 or 3 languages. Now engineers need to learn so many different languages, and the idea that these different systems talk to each other, it's so far from that point. I know in all tech movies now, or gadgety movies, right, futuristic space movies, anything physical can approach anything else physical and plug in and basically download the whole system. It's not even close. Our systems do not talk to each other at all. Like, there's so many disconnected things, and everyone's in an arms race to try to find better technology, better systems. But as a result of it, you add in this need for speed and competition. And what happened in Boeing is that multiple teams, they were working together to make something, which was the 737 MAX plane. But they didn't talk to each other. Because when you look in hindsight, the mistake is very clear and very bad. And how does this happen? And as they went through and they interviewed people on the teams, and more is coming out, anytime there's an accident, there's usually more than one person. People saw things. In fact, what's fascinating is that, we've been trained in the industrial age. Do not bring me a problem unless you have a solution, right? I think we've all been trained that. I used to use that phrase, don't come to my office with a problem, always come with solutions as well. Well, what happens if the whole thing is like a puzzle? The problem is puzzled. I don't know what the full problem is. I see pieces of the puzzle. Someone else has pieces of the puzzle. And until we put them on the table, we can't see what's happening. And what happens if the solution is puzzled? That you have people who have to work in sequence and in collaborative, tight sequence to be able to solve. Because the assumption that the problem exists as one puzzle piece and the solution exists as one puzzle piece, and both should show up at the same person, well, that's a big assumption. And the speed and the complexity things are going now, you have to be able to call out the problems. So we found a way to do it. Language matters. So we call them NQRs. Not quite right. Speak up when you see an NQR. And so you'll see it becomes so like common language in our company. It's an NQR there, and there's a little bit of an NQR. It's eggshells, NQR. Something's not quite right. And it's amazing when you hear one person talk about a certain NQR, another person will say, oh my God, right? We do this in hiring as well. We'll be interviewing and hiring people. And a phenomenal engineering candidate coming from MIT, scoring the highest in coding, and then in the bathroom says something that's NQR. But if no one volunteers it, people can't see the other things. They volunteer it, then in a team challenge, someone's observing and seeing something NQR about them, and they will volunteer that. When you have these things, it's amazing how rapidly it illuminates. Good hire, bad hire. So what's fascinating, besides Boeing, was going back 40 years. We had the privilege of spending time with a guy named Barry Gentz. He's a Harvard professor who was brought in 40 years ago, so he's a little bit older now, but we met him more recently. 40 years ago, there was the only nuclear meltdown that ever occurred in the United States. It's called a 3 Mile Island. So Barry Gentz was brought in to say, what the heck happened? Go figure it out. He went and spent time analyzing, looking at everything, and the conclusion was this. There were 5 critical people that actually even worked in the same room, I believe. They didn't talk to each other. If 5 critical people just communicated and talked to each other, a nuclear meltdown would not have occurred. 40 years ago, 1979, you fast forward 40 years, and you have Boeing, a Fortune 50 company with the most expensive technology, investments made in systems of all sorts, crashing 2 planes, not even 1, 2, time apart. People didn't speak up. So what's fascinating when we spend time understanding how the world's changed, the people in education, the best schools in education actually are Harvard and Stanford. So spend time with the teams there. And they walked us through something fascinating, which I didn't really know until then, which is how public schools were created. Public schools were created as the training ground for work. So I don't know if you knew this, but that's the original creation, and still in some ways is, because everyone who goes to school, wants to get a job. So I didn't know, but the public school system was built in 1750 by the King of Prussia, Frederick the Great. And Frederick the Great met with his advisors, his council, and really had one main goal. My goal is to produce subjects of the king, as in loyal individuals who will follow the king. And they met and discussed what are the principles, what are the pillars that we need to install in public schools. By the way, kindergarten stands for the gardening of children. The school system was built to basically, it's like AETC for the Air Force or the War College for the Navy. Or it is literally the training ground to produce something. And in this case, in 1750, subjects of the king, the team went and said there are two principles that matter most: isolation and fear. If you drive isolation and fear as the top driving principles in the system, they will produce the most loyal subjects to the king. So what do? If you look in public schools, the desks are set, so everyone is isolated. You can't talk to each other. At the same time, you think about, teachers. Every semester, every year, the teachers change. So you can't build relationships with the teachers either. In terms of fear, the students fear the teachers fear the principal fears the superintendent. And that system was incredibly effective in producing the most loyal subjects to the king. Well, fast forward, we hit a new century. By 1920, and by the way, this is an important data point, 1920 is 20% of the way into the new century. And it's an important data point because 2020 is only months away. At the 20% mark, the old system breaks apart, creating chaos. It just doesn't work. And so a guy named Cubberley in the United States said, we have a new need. We don't need loyal subjects to the king. We need followers. In fact, we need assembly line workers. We need people to come in head counts of 1,000, 10,000, and we need them to actually help the factory run. And they came up with two new principles: compliance and uniformity. And this is where core values came in, if you look in history. You need everyone to follow the rules, and you need everyone to do the exact same thing. And if you look at what happens in schools, you are literally moving down an assembly line of subjects, right? You're now in math class. Now we go to English. Then we go to the drama. Ooh, recess for everybody. And then you move on. I mean, everyone just follows along. And the connectivity between subjects, who knows? Doesn't matter because everyone's doing the exact same thing. And there's a lot of rules, right? Don't run. Don't do this. I mean, rules of all sorts. And if you look at organizations today, when a problem exists, what's the first thing we tend to do? We need to build some rules. Compliance it, right? We need to make some rules. We need to make it scary, right? This is something that everything we do, we attack with rules. And if it's not rules, we need a training program, right? We need to dictate, mandate, and lecture everyone and diversity training, on ethics training, on, everything is done this way. And in fact, when we spend time with the education schools, they said the worst form of learning comes from being lectured at, which is, of course, what I'm doing to you right now. But the worst form of learning is to be lectured at. Passive listening. There is so little retained. Meghan always says that, you listen to a TED Talk, you read a book or something, and people always comment like that was life-changing, right? We've had a lot of life-changing reactions after the academy. It's week-changing at best, maybe 3 weeks. You look back at your life afterwards as if it never happened, right? New Year's resolutions kind of run that way too, right? I mean, leading up to New Year's, oh my God, the emotions, the goosebumps you get from now on, I am going to cut out carbs, right? Or from now on, I will go to the gym. How about every day, twice a day, or something ridiculous? And then as, January 1 passes by and it's like it never happened. That conversation never occurred. That promise, the thing we wrote up, you keep me accountable. It's like none of this ever occurred, except maybe in our heads. Compliance, uniformity. So we spent time then with the most cutting edge charter schools, early learning's fascinating preschools because you've got an army of mostly mothers who even ran organizations of 10 to 100,000 people, now putting that entire knowledge, skill, and brain power into one child or two. And so when we met with the heads of early learning, like preschools, oh my God, did they have tough jobs? It's almost like, I'd hate to be a doctor these days because with WebMD and whatnot, the patients come armed with so much knowledge, you feel like an idiot compared to patients. When you look at early learning, it's the same thing. The parent, did you read this study? The New York Times had this, and the Atlantic Review had this, and have you heard about this study? And have you heard about this test that's occurring in Singapore in schools and what it's, you're like, oh my God, you need to keep up in all of this. So when we went where there was the most stress, they were forced to innovate, and what we found was this. The top schools are focused on two things, creativity and collaboration. Creativity, by the way, a simple definition is making something that did not exist. See how data-driven decision-making does not work? Because it didn't exist. There's no data on it. Collaboration is teamwork. And the idea that these two go together, the number one thing every organization, no matter the industry, craves is innovation. And not once, but continuous innovation. Innovation is not a solo sport. It's a team sport. It has to be done with people and machines to make something that did not exist. And then when we looked at some of the newer studies of what's actually expected at work, what showed up everywhere was around decision-making, judgment calls. The day when the C-level executive can write a strategic plan. I mean, I don't know if you guys still have 10-year strategic plans or 5-year plans. Even the 1-year plan kind of tends to be a joke now. By the time you print it, the assumptions were wrong. But also what ends up happening is every decision that's ever made, the second, third, fourth, fifth order consequences, you need everyone in the organization to make real-time adjustments. Our UK team created this term RTAs, real-time adjustments. The organization, every enterprise is like it's a living organism. Every single person has to adjust based on what is happening. Despite the intention of a leader, someone on top wanting to do something, when you go to apply it, it turns out differently. You need people to not follow orders. You need them to actually assess the situation, make sense of it, and then act accordingly. That's called decision-making. Another way to look at this, and I mentioned this New York Times article about children and parents in the 21st century, that dictating no longer works. This diagram was helpful for us to understand the notion of an elephant versus a cheetah. An elephant and a cheetah, if you look at the skeletal structure, are built very differently, built for very different purposes. The elephant is one of the most powerful animals on the planet. It is built to move slow and steady. Good order and discipline. Getting something, when you know for certain what to do. And there are still many places. I always say, like, if you have a dinner party and I suddenly found it's going to happen at my house tonight and all of you are coming over, I'm going to run it elephant style, right? There's not enough time to say who wants to do what. And no, it's in a couple of hours, I need to move. So there are absolutely places where this still is the method required. Slow and steady versus what is a cheetah built to do? Fast and agile. When new information hits, you have to adjust. And the difference in the organization, the way it was built, the circle on top is the leadership. The people who made the decisions, and everyone else followed and got that done. And in fact, there was a barrier where information traveled up, but it didn't travel down. In fact, most of even the military now, when you do these surveys on what's happening in my command, called DOC surveys or climate surveys, the leadership gets to then cherry pick out what you don't want them to see and emphasize the ones you want them to see. Everyone knows you're doing this, by the way, which is why whatever you share, they don't believe you. They don't believe you. Like, there's a reason why a lot of surveys have now moved to real time. Minute you answer it, boom, the results so far in your face. You know there was no time for someone to remove something. Information hoarding and hiding just doesn't work. I know so many senior leaders, you see information, you don't know what to do with it, you're worried that they can't handle it, so you choose to wait before you share it. And you're actually assuming that it's not traveling at such a crazy speed down here. They are using technologies that are free, that are available on their own phones. And I mean, I have like financial firms that say, we screen every email and our algorithms do it so we can catch all kinds of biases and, sexual assault behavior, racial bias and whatnot to the email. And I'm like, you really think your employees don't have a Gmail account? Like, you don't think they know what you're doing, so they found another way to communicate using WhatsApp and text features? You don't think they had the money to buy a second device? And I don't know if you see people in finance now, they'll sit at a meeting and they'll pull out like 3, 4 devices. I'm like, oh my God. They're like, well, this is the one work has, and that's the one they monitor. Well, this is my personal one. This is the one, this group down here, oftentimes in the leadership, they may feel like the mob. Why they feel like the mob? This group is so organized. The speed of information. If you do something wrong, I promise you, not only your whole command will know or your whole team will know, other teams know, because it's traveling like that in the middle of the talk being given. And you're thinking, maybe no one noticed. Maybe they won't find out if you don't talk about it. They're already talking. The only question is, are you involved in the conversation? Do you even know what's going on? And this notion of the organization being built differently. So we'll talk a little bit more of how to get from here. And by the way, I don't know if anyone's had bone surgery, but skeletal structure changing from elephant to cheetah is painful. Yet if you don't, you will not do so well. You could die. 1920. They say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. There's a lot of similarities. We've seen since 2015 the cries from the DOD and the CIA, from the heads. And literally, we met with John Brennan, the head of the CIA, helped him a lot and said, honestly, do you really mean that? And this is going years back. We're like, do you really mean that people, I think it was modernization of the workforce is really your number one strategy? Like, people say this all the time, but don't really mean it. And so we were sitting in their executive dining room, and the head of people and talent was sitting in with us. And straight out in front of him, his name was Glenn, I was like, is Glenn getting punished? Be very honest, because he's been at the CIA forever. He built the whole cybersecurity division of the CIA from nobody to thousands of people. And his post now is head of HR. I was like, that doesn't seem like a promotion for most companies. So honestly, John, is he being punished? And he explained how he looked around the corner at every challenge. So I call that defense versus offense, what we need to do. And it came down to our people. And I went, and this is John speaking, and studied every single leader I had in the organization and said, who's my absolute best individual? Glenn was the absolute best, proven track record. And so he changed his role from head of cybersecurity, one of their top products, to head of people. That was in 2015 or 16 in that case when we talked to them. We've only seen this accelerate. And so I don't know if 2020 exactly is when everything starts falling apart, but there's a lot of issues happening everywhere in almost every organization. Now, I'm going to spend more time, and I don't know if we need a bio break or anything at all. Maybe not. By the way, if you need to go to the bathroom, you don't need to ask permission. This is not like Shawshank where, bathroom break boss kind of thing. You can just go and people get very upset. And I don't think you're using the feedback app right now, so it's awesome for us, me speaking. But really, any point, anywhere, please grab a snack, grab a drink, just will not take offense. This is what I want to go into more detail, though, into the practical steps. When it comes to team sports, it fails in 2 main ways. One is we do not know how to argue with adults. In fact, what's fascinating is this. We got known because we found initially the sequence that was important was to start with feedback. So we became the feedback company to some companies out there. And this is a feedback academy, but feedback is only a fraction of what you need. It was a starting point. But you know what arguing with another adult is? It's feedback, right? You have a point, I disagree, right? I disagree violently, right? I'm going to give you my feedback. And then Meghan's going to give you her feedback on my feedback, right? With violent disagreement. We don't do this well. In fact, avoiding arguments, avoiding conflict, we do much better, right? It's a lot easier to have silent protests, silent wars. In fact, it's so well known in research, it's called organizational silence. People talk about hostility coming from all different types of things at work. There is no more common and greater form of hostility than silence. Have you ever seen two people have dinner and they're not talking at all? Have you been in a meeting where everyone is so scared to speak up? And when someone blunders, they quickly stutter and quiet down and say nothing else. Or someone's sitting there the whole meeting not saying one word, right? And what are you thinking? But they have looks on their face, the scowl, right? Maybe they may even shake their head and you're thinking, do you disagree? Like, can you speak up? No, I have nothing to say. What are you thinking? Oh, no, nothing. I'm following, right? The hostility that shows up more commonly in every place is silence. And I'll walk you through, in fact, how bad it is. If you understood how much and how fast our brain works. In fact, this is what happens. When you type, an average fast typist types 60 to 70 words a minute. They say people speak at 300 to 400 words a minute, but we think at 3,000 to 4,000 words a minute. So when someone is just speaking, like I'm speaking the whole time, I'm speaking only 10% of what my brain is thinking in real time. But when someone speaks near zero and they're thinking 3,000 to 4,000 words a minute, what the hell's going on? What are they not saying? In fact, Meghan coined a term I love, LHF, lying, hiding, and faking. We all play poker every day when we go to work. Usually when we go home, we stop playing poker, we stop bluffing, and our family gets the brunt of our truth, which is also a whole other problem of bullying epidemics and other things that literally stem from you holding this back from work. That's truly an HBR case study they wrote, how bullying comes from unhappy parents from work, taking it out when they go home. And that's the top thing that drives it, which is kind of crazy. LHF, we hold our tongue. We lie, we hide, we fake. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Yes, sir, I do, right? Do you have a question? Nope, it's crystal clear, right? You walk out, what the hell was he talking about? Who was that guy? Did you notice that NQR, what he did? I mean, like, it's just, the book they wrote from Harvard, they call this the second job. The second job being that the job we don't get paid for. We spend more time, more effort trying to manage our status, our brand, and trying to make sure nobody discovers that I'm a complete idiot here, and the only one who doesn't know any idea what's going on and should be fired from this post. I'm going to cover that up. And so that leads to just silence. Everyone's bluffing. And we spent time with some of the top neuroscientists in the country, brain doctors. And they did this fascinating thing. They put you through this machine and they were talking to you and quizzing you as they're reading brain activity. And they found that telling the truth versus lying was 2 times harder than telling the truth. LHFing is 2 times as hard for your physical body and mind than telling the truth. So when you're spending this much time at work playing politics and bureaucracy and LHFing, and you're talking about insufficient resources, I have no energy left, no more hours in me. Well, you're spending 2/3 of the week, every week, on something you do not get paid for, that is not good for their organization. And yes, transparency can make others apeshit, right? And then them being transparent can make you apeshit, but you'll be more efficient because that is where the majority of our time is going. So we'll talk more about how to argue and give you some top 2 tools and strategies we discovered. The other is how to solve important and complex problems. There's a great cartoon that shows, I put in some of the academies, there's a windy path and it says basically solutions, right? So it's like answers that are simple but wrong, complex but right. Everyone is going down the simple but wrong, and very few people down the complex but right. The simple stuff, can we just agree it's done? When there's a simple decision, a simple thing, like we don't need to talk about it because it's like obvious, just do it, right? Someone broke a glass, let's go pick it up. We don't need to, who should pick that up? Should we talk about how it doesn't happen next time? Should we make a whole compliance and rule set? And should we, no, just go pick it up. There's simple things, simple solutions, done. But what's left for us, and this is the part We beat ourselves up and people will beat you up, but what's left on our plates is important and complex things. And it's not obvious what to do. In fact, you should take the time, but every time you wait, there's a cost because life is moving, right? The whole world doesn't get to stop just so you can think and go do your research and figure out what to do. No, as I said before, the mob is making decisions. They're rallying, they're running surveys, and they're talking about what should be done and coming with data that supports it. And they're moving at lightning speed. So, how to solve important and complex problems? We'll go into that as well. Do we need a break at all or no? Can't tell. Yes? Show of hands if anyone? Yes? Okay, 5-minute break, and then I'll just get the whiteboard up and then we can Hey, Daryl, can we get the group?
If we can have everyone start making their way back, please, we'll get started for the next portion. Boston, I assume you're all back and ready to go?
We're good in Boston.
Thank you.
All right, I think everyone's back. So they'll take a picture of this afterwards too. So if you don't want to take notes and whatnot, and I'll try to, my handwriting sometimes isn't the best, but I'll try to read and tell you what's up here. So just really quick, I put a couple of things. One is I want to spend the most time talking about this conversation 3. So I'll explain to you each of the conversations, but basically team 1, senior to senior, adults to adults arguing. It's the hardest part actually of this whole thing. And so how to argue, but then of course, how to solve important, complex problems. And the two are related, right? If you have something important and complex and you're not arguing, I would say you have a problem, right? So if you have something important and complex and you're not arguing, I would say it's simple then, right? Like if you're not arguing about something with your child, you're probably like, it's simple stuff. But when you're arguing and you think about the things you argue with, including bedtime and just eating food, you have to think that's only the surface level of the complex and important stuff. 2 adults, 2 parents arguing is because something is important and something is complicated. And I found that to be helpful because oftentimes when we argue, we're so trained and wired to stop arguing. Stop raising your voice. You don't give yourself the permission to literally just say what's on your mind. And to realize, wait, like there was a great quote I said the other day, which is when your emotions flare up, right? Whether it's like spiking up because you're overly excited or, angry or depressed, you have to pause and think, why is that? What's showing up from my past experience that whatever it is, this is the tipping point of something. And to understand that, and what you'll find is when things are difficult to solve is where you'll find the most emotions come in. And rather than suppress them, giving yourself the permission to understand their signals. Your body is giving you signals. So I'll go into that more, but I just want you to recognize the hardest part of these conversations is this conversation right here, conversation 3. So the way to look at it is I drew this quick pyramid here. There's 2 teams, right? There's a lot in between, but just think about a senior team as well as the junior team. And there's a lot of levels in between. There's actually 4 minimum conversations that are occurring. Sorry, we're clearly in New York City, which is why this is just like, if you were in nature right now, you hear waterfalls and birds. This is our version of birds and waterfalls. So sorry on the phone if you can't hear, but the junior team is conversation 1. They're talking amongst themselves. That's right. Yeah. Oh, there you go. Problem solved. The junior team, conversation 1, talking amongst themselves. Conversation 2 is the junior talking upwards to the senior team, right? Conversation 3 is the senior team talking amongst themselves. And then conversation 4 is the senior talking downwards to the junior team. So I'm going to spend the least amount of time in the conversations 1, 2, and 4, so I can spend the most time in conversation 3, where when we drill down, we found this is where it breaks down the most. The other stuff, if you picked up nothing, probably less important, the breakdown is occurring in 3. And the reason why it's important is these things kind of do play into each other. Oftentimes, the junior people are pushing information at a crazy rate now to senior people to try to convince you need to go do something. This is how other people do it. This is how the Israeli military does it. This is how Google does it. This is how so-and-so does it. Like we have to follow the best practices, right? And just like we're behind. And the senior people need to figure out that piece and they make a decision and they have to then communicate downwards, right? What's happening, how they're making sense of it, what they're deciding. And so this cycle breaks down here above all else. But of course, there are issues in each step. So I'm going to try to go through the first these two parts faster, but if you have questions, let me kind of take questions as we go through. So there are three main thoughts I want to share over here. And I group these together because on one hand, maybe it's not fair that I'm simplifying what's happening here, but it's not quite simple. But to help you understand it, the first thing that's important is a lesson we got actually from educators that I love. I want you to think about the lens, right? You think of glasses. Everyone's looking at the world through different lenses. And the thing they talked about was this simple way to think of what actually happens. Sorry, I'm just. So when you are very little, the top question we then to ask is why? Why do I have to go to bed? Why do I do this? Why do I have to eat? Why do I, why? Before you know it, you start to become a kid, a child, and the top thing is about fair. It's not fair. It's not fair that they get to stay up later and I don't. It's not fair. You're like, drinking and eating ice cream and candy and I can't. Like, fair becomes the top thing. But before you know it, as you become a teenager or young adult, everything is looked at through the lens of happy. I'm gonna do what makes me happy. And so happy becomes one of the top priority lenses that look into. But once you become a parent, once you have a child, the number one thing that gets talked about is what is the right thing to do. Now, this is kind of complicated because the right thing has history. The right thing also has future outlook. And oftentimes as a parent, if you meet a parent talking about how great they're parenting, I laugh at them because I'm like, you won't know till later. Like when they talk about I am such a good manager, and I was like, how many employees are you managing and how long has it been? It's like, oh, I just started, I just got promoted. I was like, you won't know till later. All these things you'll know later. And that's why the right thing is so damn hard. And when you think about what's happening here, fair and happy is generally a short-term lens, and it tends to follow what is popular. The right thing is tough because you have to factor in short-term, but you have to think about the long-term as well. And there's a lens of responsibility. You need to be here to pick up the pieces if you made the wrong calls right now. And what happens often, and this is the hardest part of parenting about being a leader, the right thing to do oftentimes will make people very unhappy in the short term and oftentimes will not be fair in the short term. This we got from some top leaders in the field of education and saying this is kind of literally what shows up at schools. I thought it was a great way to understand what is actually happening. It's not that they're trying to be difficult. They're just looking at it through this lens here. And in fact, one of the fascinating things, I shared this with some of the 3 and 4 stars in both the Air Force and the Navy, I think Marines also, and even Army. And what we found was this: I think the top lens you guys use is fair. Promotions are fair. Everything here is fair. And I drew this and said, fair is even at the bottom tier of this short-term lens. Happy goes at least a notch higher. It's not about being fair, because to do the right thing, oftentimes you will do things that seem unfair in the short term. And so this was very helpful for us, which I hope it kind of helps you a little bit. There's another piece that was very helpful. So I'm kind of running out of space, but I'm going to make do. It's what I call the distorted view. As a leader, we get a lot of distorted views of what's actually happening. I don't think there's a leader at this point who says, yeah, I don't believe in feedback. I get no feedback, right? When I give a talk, I don't want to hear how I did. I'm a believer in zero feedback, zero reaction. I have a plan. I don't want any reaction to it. I think there might be times for that, but generally speaking, right? There's not a leader who thinks that they got the feedback, right? The only problem is oftentimes we get distorted feedback. The same half a dozen people come to you all the time, tell you how wonderful that was, how amazing that decision was. And then you hear the reality, most people hated it and thought you were a complete idiot. I can't believe you think like this. And yet the people who come to you say, wow, I'm so inspired by you all the time. Like your bad day is better than most people's good days. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. So I did okay then. Like distorted views we get often. And there's two main ways distorted occurs. One is this interesting insight we got. We met this woman, Brenda Tracy. She was known for really bad gang rape that occurred by football players. And she spent her life. I mean, there was a horrible case down. I can't remember what football team, but like she's around my age now. She's 40 something, and she spent the first part of her life trying to tell people how bad, sexual assault is. And then she said, I had a big awakening. I realized that first in the stats, sexual assault is predominantly done by men, but it's done by approximately 10% of the men. And so she had this awakening when she said, I realized that 10% are bad. 90% are good. I've been spending my life trying to tell and stop bad people from doing bad things, when I realized there's 10 times the number of good people who are doing nothing. If I can get them to act, to speak up, they will drown out the bad. This occurs in almost every organization. At best, you have 10% bad actors. And you're writing rules and putting training in place to shut down this 10% and not realizing the white blood cells of your organization is this group. They are wired to fix what's wrong in their community, their team. But as the leadership, we get a distorted view because this stands out loudly. We put money, we put energy, we do a lot to try to shut down this when you don't realize you have an entire team who does not believe in that. There's the flip side also, or not flip side, another view that's important. Any given point, and it's fascinating, we saw this just almost everywhere we went, and we saw even the data using the feedback app. No matter what you do at some point, a third will be skeptical. A third will be undecided, and a third will be in favor or believe, right? A third are skeptical, third are in favor. There's stuff I've done in our company, our employees hate it, and then there's a tool where you can upvote if you agree, usually no more than a third of our employees. When there's like hate feedback I get, which I get a lot of, or at least enough, it's usually no more than a third. We found this in almost every place, and you'll see this in any given situation when it's uncertain, right? This group is actually the most vocal. And we tend to believe that's everybody. It is not. They're the minority. There's a large group here undecided. And you know what they're doing is there's a constant recruitment going on, right? This group is trying to recruit here, and this group is trying to recruit here. But what we hear as leaders oftentimes is this red skeptical group. We believe that's the truth. We may even come out and say, so I've heard we all think, right? The food here sucks. And suddenly they're thinking, wait, I guess the food here does suck. Before you know it, you've made a majority. What we found in the data was these two red circles of the 10% bad and 1/3 skeptical oftentimes influence the leaders a lot more than it should. So we get a distorted view. So I don't think you can see beyond this, so I'm going to just put it over here. So one more component on this that's important is this. So here's so I call this the present situation. And the goal is to move it to a better situation. This group down here, team 2, are people, this is one of the ones I got a lot of feedback from our company, at least a third. I call them the mob, and they hated me for that, but I call them the mob because when you're sitting in this role, they feel like the mob. The mob can be the union, for example. They feel unionized. They're so organized. They seem to run surveys and come to agreement way faster than we do. And we have to make the call. And when we make the wrong call, we pay the price in the long run. So the consequences of making the bad call is not, oops, I'm sorry, like they wanted it, which is why I did it, right? I mean, what leader has gotten away with that, right? Well, I did it because they wanted it. They ran a survey. That's what most people wanted, right? Hire a lot more people. So we just did it. Like, I mean, there's so many things that you can't listen to what they're saying as the decision of what to do. It is a data point. Short-term is a data point, but you have to factor in more. So the present situation of what happens, though, is this. A lot of their discussions go public, and I say public, but I think about more of the wild, wild west of the internet. There is so much technology out there. I want you to think about Facebook groups. I joked around. I know in the military there's a thing called the triad, right? So this is the officer, the senior enlisted, and the XO, at least in the Navy. Similar groups, right? That there's probably a Facebook group of, the triads are always wrong, right? Or the resistance to the triad, right? There's a resistance to the triad group out there. If you think it really doesn't exist, I'm sure it exists. But I think about Facebook. I think about WhatsApp. I think of Reddit. I think about the things that are out there. It is amazing how well organized the use of technology, information. Like we sat through this group for the former Secretary of the Air Force, and they had a team of, I think, 20-something people spend 1 year studying the squadrons, right? Revitalizing the squadron. They had 10 people sit on the committee to then review their study. Meghan and I were one of the 10 or two of the 10. And literally, this document is so thick. I mean, they had like 4,000 interviews, 1 full year. And then one of the attendees, they brought a millennial and said, I ran that same study in 48 hours and actually came to the same conclusions, actually, but better. And literally, like, I mean, they wanted to wring his neck, kick him out, but that's literally like what you're dealing with. They're dealing with, and he's like, I didn't need all that money. I just ran it off a free survey tool called SurveyMonkey, and boom, we got it. Like, and it's like, and this is him speaking to the Secretary of the Air Force and, Golfy, the Chief of the Air Force. And they're like, don't know how to respond. But like, this is what's happening, right? The discussion's out there and it's happening very fast. In fact, when you look at CEOs, they are paranoid of sites like Glassdoor and Reddit because anonymously they can say anything they want and you can't tell who they are. Like these sites are built to protect the identity. So unless they get hacked and, there's some bad sites like Ashley Madison got hacked, but that's a different story, right? But like, generally speaking, right? The security of these public sites are set where you can go and speak anonymously. You can go and create multiple identities if you want. You can create 19 accounts and act like different people to make your point louder. And you laugh, but this is literally what Yelp has gotten in trouble for, and this is what a lot of companies and reviews. It's the review generation, and it matters what the more numbers kind of matter. So that is one. And the other one, of course, that's happening is it's hidden from the senior team. A lot of discussions, right? Now, it might happen not just digitally, happens in after hours, water cooler talks, at bars, on weekends, right? I don't know if you know how many events go on that you're not invited to, especially when someone leaves, right? Especially when someone quits or something bad, there's a party. There's always a party. You're just not invited to it. Like, and they meet for a long time, and the next day you see them all groggy coming in and wondering what happened, right? Most times you don't know. It's hidden from senior people. So what we found were solutions that I would not say solves anything, but it was just better than the present situation. So one was you bring the conversation in-house. It is better to have the discussion inside the family, inside the house, than letting it happen outside. Because when it's happening outside right now, you also don't know who's talking in there. Oftentimes the competition's in there acting as an employee. It is very easy to do. And you cannot tell, even if it's United States versus Russia or China. I mean, fake accounts are everywhere now. And it happens also talking about the employer. There's a guy I met who's a funny guy. He's one of the billionaires in India. He ran, I forgot the name of the company. It's HCL or something. It's a huge tech company, one of the biggest IT outsourcing companies. And so they created this anonymous board inside the company to put up whatever people want to talk about. It's all anonymous, right? top item that showed up was HCL sucks, is the top topic. Second is the CEO of HCL sucks, right? So like, HR comes, compliance comes, shut this thing down. Oh my God. He's like, just leave it be, right? Let's see what happens. This is a company over 100,000 employees. So time goes on, right? And so I met this guy and I met him like 5 years later and said, so what happened to that experiment? Is it still running? He's like, yeah. A couple of interesting things. One is water cooler discussions died down, almost disappeared. Everything venomous and toxic about the company was written up there. There's nothing to talk about. So that was interesting. So I was like, well, so that sounds cool. So what does it say now? HCL sucks, HCL CEO sucks. The only difference is the conversation came in-house. And so bringing the conversation in-house versus letting it happen out there was far healthier. The other part is this: as a senior person, getting an observation seat. Now, that observation seat will feel very much like the capucha monkey, right? Like, I can't believe they're saying this, right? We need to fix this. There's this billionaire woman I met who literally has a lot of free time now, has created this convoluted profile of a Facebook girl, teenager, so she can be friended by her 13-year-old daughter. She posts every week places she's been and whatnot, and has pictures always of this made up her in a group because she wants to see what is going on. Now, I know this sounds like crazy parenting, right? This is what we do in leadership. I have some moles in the office who come and tell me what's really going on, right? We may hate what happens, but it's better to see than not see. In research, they talked about exposing problems versus hiding problems. You can't solve something you can't see. So when I look at these two things, it's really just a choice of both situations are bad in many ways, but this is just worse. And this side here just makes it better. So when we ended up building the feedback app, it was literally to bring some of these conversations in-house, and we saw the impact it had. Glassdoor is still there, but it just dropped dramatically. We had a lot of bad stuff happen, disgruntled people, but now it's all in-house. And in fact, this tool is more powerful because you get to actually read the pulse of your own team, not muddled by other strangers who just get to act like they're employees of the company. The observation seat, many a day, I freaking hate the app, what it says. Feel like the capucha monkey. Me and Meghan read it, I want to throw it out the window, and I want to know who said it. But, we made a rule ourselves that, it's like the nuclear codes. We like movies, right? It's like a nuclear code. Meghan, I, and Tom, our head of engineering, each have a third of the password. So unless we 3 human beings agree, we will not unlock the identity of the giver of the feedback. So we went through tremendous means to actually protect the anonymity of who says what. But we found that we want people to talk, but many things are very difficult to talk about. At the same time, this whole group, there's a tool we ended up building of upvoting and downvoting. You'll see even in research, as a leader, we weigh feedback disproportionately. In fact, confirmation biases. If you think something needs to be done and someone comes and says, well, this is what I heard. How many times have you had some person from usually this team represent everyone feels this way, right? Everyone and almost everyone. And you're thinking, we must change them. I must address it. It's usually no more than a third, and oftentimes it's 1 or 2 people. You'll see, it's interesting when we launch the app, there's feedback that goes in, and the first time you see something, difficult for someone, whether it's directed at me or somebody else, you're thinking, oh my God. And then you wait a matter of minutes, and the crowd goes and scrubs it through with an up or down vote. And you start to realize, wait, nobody else cares about this. Most pieces of feedback, nobody cares about except that one person. But every now and then it will light up. And that's when you're saying you have to pay attention. It may light up with a short-term focus, but it is a signal that this one resonated. Most times, it's kind of 50-50 or nobody cares. It's one person's point of view, and that was important. There's another exercise we will do more on an intense basis. So you'll go through it, I think, today, maybe the what's working, what's not working exercise, right? But sometimes it's so toxic, we change the exercise to what sucks here and what sucks less. There are issues in your company. And in fact, one of the lessons we learned working closely with the Navy right now has been that there is so much latent toxicity built in. You need to find a way to let it out intensely first before you can go into a regular rhythm of people speaking up. People just have a lot to say and they've been quieted in the elephant style for way too long. But it's amazing. It's like taking steam out of a pot. Once you let out a burst of steam, you can go to a normal rhythm. So these are 3 things, which I hope to actually do quicker, but on kind of insights for this team here. Conversation 4, I'll just give you something maybe in the interest of time. There are 2 things that kind of matter. Right now, sorry, let me just do this. I think of things are always easier to understand if you understand kind of the what not to do versus what to do, right? The comparison of the 2 usually is quite helpful. Sorry, markers everywhere. So one of the things to not to do is approximately 100% lecture. When you think about downwards communication, they're almost always lectures. The other part that occurs is approximately 100% of it is done by, I guess, we call them teachers, coaches, consultants, outsiders, what you call an expert, right? So when in doubt, bring in an expert, right? So versus what we found was 5% should be lecture. 95% should be experiential. And experiential is not a workshop. In fact, that's one of the big mistakes, case studies and workshops. People think just because I got to shuffle a few papers, there's a part of actually taking risk into this unknown black hole of did I do the right thing before you hear someone else's point of view. But I think what's important and experiential is this: one real encounter is greater than hundreds of observations. As a leader, right? When you had to fire someone or even hire and you hired wrong, usually it's a mistake, one mistake. You can read hundreds of books and videos and lectures. It will do nothing in relative comparison to the one real experience. And so that's there. The other part is this. 5% from outside consultants, coaches, experts. 95% of the solution is a notion of a coaching pyramid. West Point does this well. Many groups do this well. Preschools do this well. Have you ever heard of a 4-year-old mentor? A 4-year-old coach? What the hell can a 4-year-old teach? Well, they teach 3-year-olds. And 5-year-olds teach 4-year-olds. It's amazing how someone with just a little bit more experience, their ability to teach. And in fact, in research, it's called proximal zone of development. We learn better from someone who's more relevant. Have you talked to someone who is 40 years more experienced and they do that? Well, when I was a kid, right? And I had to walk uphill all the time and I had nothing, right? Like, it's just not as relevant. It's nice to hear the story sometimes. There's lessons in there if you can translate it. But most times, someone usually 6 to 24 months more experience is the perfect person to teach you. 6 to 25 or 24, 1 to 2 years. They say even for startups, if you want startup advice, find a company that has 1 to 2 fundraising rounds ahead of you. They will give you the best, most relevant advice. So just, you're going to experience 10X as a program that actually built a lot of nuances of what experiential learning is, and you'll experience it yourself. So, and you'll see part of coaching pyramid and whatnot. Okay, I'm going to say move. Yes. So the thing I wanted to cover, right? This is why the reporter kind of tends to be bad. But so, sorry. I like this stuff, so I have a lot more I could add. But anyways, how to argue? I think I mentioned before, 60 to 70 words is kind of the speed that we can. So if you think words per minute is typing, 300 to 400 is how fast most people talk. 3,000 to 4,000 is the speed that we think. And the differential between this and this is what I like to call LHFing, right? Filter, right? We're filtering, if you're a fast speaker, 90%. If you don't filter, right? As in, or you all filter, you can be 100% filter, right? You can be 100% LHF. The best thing we found, there was a body of research called ladders of inference. I don't know if you've heard of this, but I think it was one of the most effective tools on how to help adults argue. So if this is the data or this is the information out there, this is what it looks like for two people. So the first is they select, then they process, and then they have a conclusion. This person is doing the same thing here. Two different people, right? One way to think of select is my assumptions. Process is my mental model or my logic, whichever you want to call it. And what tends to occur, right, when two people go to any situation, because by the way, if you ever meet someone that says, I know all the data, just obviously they're a baby, right, very naive. You never know all the data. There's so much stuff, you can't know everything. People tend to only share number 3. And they butt heads, right? I think this is the right thing to do. I think this is the right thing to do. It's based on values. Values are mental models. They come from something in the past, usually traumatic experiences that helped you survive, which is why I learned this is the important value I chose to pick up and follow. Where what needs to happen is actually sharing not only the conclusion, so it's always a plus, right? Just like over here, it's a plus this and a plus this. Make your point. Then talk about, right? What are the assumptions behind it? And what's the and when you look at mental models, you always think about the origins. Let me give you the reason why I believe this is the way I process it. And when you start to see this, and they share this, you get to a much better place. And I cannot tell you how many times you think that you know all the data and you realize, wait, you saw what? You saw something I didn't see, and then you know what? Your logic isn't that bad either. But you know why we tend not to do this? Because most people will laugh at us. All our political incorrectness, our biases, you know, like there's stuff that like you'll get laughed at. This is imperfect processes and imperfect data, and yet we make very decisive conclusions. So when I share it, you're going to probably laugh at me. You're going to think less of me. And so it's a lot easier to not share this. And in fact, a lot of people, it's better not to vote till the majority has voted, right? When the majority says we should do this, well, I'll be the 51% vote, right? I also agree, right? Well, I also disagree. But when you are in the ability for two adults, two senior adults, and they can do this well, like, oh my God, the difference that you can get in results. Now, this is so hard, right? When you do this, you'll start to, because by the way, a lot of the biases are against each other, right? I'm too aggressive, she's too passive. Guess what most of our fights are? Too aggressive, too passive, right? And I've assumed, without you even saying much, that you're going to have a passive solution, right? She's assumed I'm going to have an aggressive solution. But if you don't say these things, like, you're arguing without knowing what you're arguing about. So we found there's something very important that goes with this process. So with the ladders of inference. And you will practice this tomorrow. We call it the LBR. Bring it to light. Take a break. Revisit. Bring it to light, the first part. It is all about maximum just, and in fact, I'm going to circle it red. This is where it's painful. Do not filter. Faster you speak, the better it is. I mean, literally, you should practically be spitting as you speak because it's so fast coming out of your mouth. Visceral. Share everything imaginable. Every anecdote, just put it on the table. Do not think about, am I offending you? It's like, I'll apologize to you later, but I'm just going to tell you every reaction I have as fast as possible. And this is a very painful process. By the way, the most basic unit of team is 2 people. Is that difficult? You need to take a break. And the break can be as small as a bathroom break. It can be a walk around the block, a workout, or an overnight sleep at most. At most. Because you need to then go revisit the conversation. And this is where all the gold happens, all the value. Most L's, they'll bring it to light, is so painful, they don't want to talk about it again. In fact, the mental motto I had is never bring that up to Meghan, right? That's my mental model, I believed, right? It's a topic about XYZ, never bring it up because that's just associated with pain. But it's amazing, the most painful things, the most complex, important, difficult things, you take a break and you revisit. And literally on the way back from the bathroom, I'll be thinking, God, Meghan has a point. Like, and I'm starting to see her side. And I can't tell you how many times we'll come back after the bathroom break and we'll be like, I'm sorry. I'm like, what are you sorry about? I'm sorry. And then suddenly like you're having a discussion where I always think of the light as if you ever barbecue, right? And you buy those charcoal balls, right? I don't know if I can draw these right, but right? It's filled with gasoline. So when you light it on fire, it just goes, right? It's just burning bright. But give it a few minutes. You know what happens? The same charcoal ball is there. And it's hot. In fact, that's when you can cook with it. But it's not on fire. The truth, like the monkey, puts us on fire. That break is usually enough, no more than overnight, to still keep the thing hot, but help you find the insights. So this ladders of inference needs this, because doing this without an LBR, you will never want to talk to them again. It's very painful. I'll leave you one last piece since I have 10 more minutes, right? So what's interesting about solving complex problems, one of the biggest mistakes is we try to think of solving things one time, and we think of scheduled. Have you ever had a scheduled innovation session? Right? There's a funny joke with like this German group saying like Germans know how to have fun. We will have fun now, right? Innovation works this way. Let's meet Friday at 4 o'clock. We'll solve that one Friday at 4, right? Like, well, no, how about we schedule it for next month? Next month, we will meet, we'll sit down. No, let's wait for our offsite, right? In 3 days, we will fix the entire issues of the entire Air Force, of the entire Navy, right? Whatever it might be. Like, we'll schedule it, we'll bring all the bodies, and we will fix it right now. And what we found was that's what the inexperienced innovator does. Because when you gain experience, you realize it's not one time, it's continuous. And when it comes to innovation, you have to set up. You have to set up to constantly be looking at the problems. This does not work unless, by the way, it's simple and non-important issues, right? Simple, non-important, you can have a meeting, solve it. But if it's complex and it's important, there's several things that are going to happen. It's going to be continuous, and you have to set up for it. So, I don't know if most people here, since it's the military, this guy is mentioned a lot, Stockdale, Jim Stockdale, right? Famous guy. People take different lessons from it, but the lesson we took, it was from the book Good to Great, talks about Jim Stockdale created this thing, or after him, called the Stockdale paradox. So Stockdale was known as one of the top military generals, or I don't know if he was a general, but admiral, okay, admiral, sorry, who, it's like Navy, right? I didn't know that. Prisoner of war, and led, I think, something in the 2,000 plus other prisoners of war out of Vietnam. So giving credit for just helping them stay alive and not die. But the most fascinating thing that I found with the Stockdale paradox was this. You know how all of us, I think, generally believe we're either optimists or pessimists, right? Like, and you know, we always say is, I know like you're never 100%, but we always have what I call a 51%, our majority. Majority of the time, I'm an optimist. Majority of the time, Meghan's a pessimist. So no matter the situation, most times, especially when under stress, Meghan will see the bad in it. I'll see the good in it. That's just by default what tends to happen. So we tend to believe we're optimists or pessimists, right? We all kind of are in balance one side. Well, here's what's fascinating. So what happened in this Vietnam prison was, you know, there's a lot of people there, right, locked up, and they generally, there's a large group of them who thought they will be out by Christmas. And those are the optimists, that they're going to be freed by Christmas. And as it got close to Christmas, like December 23rd, 24th, they started to get sick. And shortly after, they all died. As in, the optimists, when that optimism did not turn out to be true, it made them sick physically and they died. So you're like, that's why I'm a pessimist, right? Well, the pessimist died shortly after. So you might outlive the optimist, but both are dying. People who said, we'll never be free, we'll be here forever, the rest of our lives, they died too. All the optimists and all the pessimists died. So who the hell were these 2,000 people that got out? Those 2,000 people, they say, had Jim Stockdale's help to do two things. They had the faith that they will make it out, that this experience may end up being a life-defining experience for all of them. But they were grounded in reality that it is going to be a while, it is not easy, we need to take care of ourselves. And they had both optimism and pessimism. They had faith and reality. And those are the only people who made it out. Now, this is very hard for us to do realistically. Two opposing thoughts, two opposing emotions, we cannot hold in our heads. Oftentimes, why you need team. The best teams has an optimist and a pessimist on the same team. But like I said, not scheduled, but continuous. So there are many ways to do this, but one of the most effective ways, I actually meant to pull this up, but there's a picture of our wall in our office versus a wall of one of you guys, one of the officers. And it's like kind of comical how our wall literally looks like a mad scientist drawing of just scribbles everywhere. It's like this board times like 100. And that's our wall, like changing all the time. And the other one looks just like really clean. It looked like a checklist of what to order for a party, like flatware check, paper check, right? But there's a thing that we built a while back. We call it the VX versus the V1, V2, and there's a cloud in the middle. The VX is the faith. We have a part of the wall dedicated to the VX, the North Star. And in fact, what we found was we need a placeholder. It's a visual. It is like a movie. You have to be able to see what you want. If you can't see what you want, it's very hard to get it. And over time, this will upgrade or downgrade, all based on your trend. And said another way, this is where the faith lives. This is where the reality. Said another way, this is where all the good stuff is, and this is where all the bad stuff is. On complex, important problems, we are drowning in problems. And drowning in just the reality of how tough and how bad and impossible it is. But trend is what's important. So here's the part of trends that we found to be important. There is a trend on offense that's different than a trend on defense. Meaning, when you have accidents occur, it was Malcolm Gladwell who wrote about this in the book Outliers. An accident rarely occurs for any other reason than human errors. But it's not one human error. It's an accumulation of errors. Well, the common example used is when you watch football games and someone does a fumble, it's like, oh my God, game's over. Now, fumbles do not lose the game. It's the 6 errors that follow the fumble that lose the game. And what they found was this magical number of 7. It takes 7 or more wrong things happening for an accident to show up. And it takes 7 or more right things happening in sequence for innovation to show up. But the difference on the two was this. When you think of the wrong things happening, defense is slower. Wrong things happen in approximately 90 days. And we saw this trend in hospitals and sports teams and almost every organization we spent time with, which is it takes more time for wrong things to happen. This is the good news. If you're scared of making a mistake, don't worry, just don't make 6 in a row. Also recognize they will happen over 90 days. Unless you're overly startled and you force a lot of mistakes. I mean, that's a different story, but people do that. We found in the first few mistakes, this is inefficient to act on. Or some people call this startled. You don't need to do anything. A lot of mistakes literally just disappear on their own. We can watch it though. So you have to watch it because this next window is the perfect time to act. This is the preventative measure right here. Because if you get beyond that is when the accident occurs. But the reason why we can't prevent it is because we're not watching it. Right? Bad things happening. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to think about that. And accidents are an accumulation of bad decisions. It's an accumulation of human errors occurring usually over 90 days. So as long as you are keeping it exposed in front of you, you can stop the accident from happening through the right corrective decision. If you act too early, you'll see that all you'll do is play defense, which some of us do, right? It's all we do at work, play defense. The flip side, though, is fascinating. When it came to offense, what we found was innovation occurred in a much tighter sequence of approximately 3 to 10 days. You needed to make aggressive 7 or more right calls in short bursts. But the other part we found was these things work in a way it's leveled. So when we looked at V1, right? So V stands for version in the tech world, which is why we use VX, future version X versus V1, V2. V1 has the highest ROI or highest return, approximately 50%. V2 gets you an additional 30%. V3 gets you 10%. And then it was 5%, 2%, 1%, 1%. And I'm sharing this because most organizations, the leaders are spending all their time on a gazillion V0s, right? Nothing's been done. It's just a plan, right? But I'm loving these plans, and the more and more plans coming. And then you have a gazillion V1s, right? And what happens in offense that's fascinating is this. If it doesn't get to V7, it doesn't stay. V7 is when you've leveled up. V7 is when you get to a point. So if you ever watch the game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you can get right answers. And if you hit a certain marker like 1,000, even if you get the next answers wrong, you'll drop to 1,000. Then there's another marker that goes up. It's very similar. If you don't get to V7, it literally will go back down to 0. And what ends up happening for a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders is, I love the V1 because that euphoria of 50% return, right? A lot of times people will say, you know what, I'm good at starting stuff, right? I don't like to finish, but I'm good at starting. I'm good at starting startups, right? Someone else can finish it. Like, because that 50%. And as you go higher up, the return's smaller and smaller, but it is what matters for you to level up. And that follow through matters there. So this is something that it occurs in very short windows. If you look back at anything great that's occurred, you can trace it back to a very short window of 7 decisions, and then it levels up. Then there's another set of 7 versus this. So, sorry, I'm cut off. But.
I didn't mean to cut off. I was just thinking we're supposed to start doing Q&A. Well, we're supposed to do Q&A in the last half an hour, but let's do this. We'll set up lunch. But if you have questions, we'll take a few questions now while they're setting up lunch. And then you guys can eat while the 10X is running because you don't have to participate in any way. You're just observing. So you guys can eat while we run 10X, if that's okay. Because I thought it would be helpful to actually hear this. I think this is important content, which is why we kept it going, and we could go on actually a lot longer. It's a lot of awesome stuff in here. So we thought, let's do that. We'll take some questions. We can always take questions later tonight. Both Charlie and I will be here after dance. I'm only taking a question if you come to the dance class, though. You have to come. That's the rule. So we'll do that right now. We'll take questions. Maybe we could start with Boston, a question, and then we'll take a question in New York. And then while we're doing that, we'll get lunch set up, and then you guys can start eating as soon as that's set up. Feel free to get up, go to the bathroom, get lunch while we're even doing the Q&A. Is okay. Okay. Let's give Charlie a round of applause before we do that, because that was awesome.
Do you have any questions in Boston? And if you could please state your name, who you're with, and then ask your question, please. Anyone in Boston? Wants to be the first. All right, we got one.
Hi, my name is Riva Damala. I'm with Tufts University. And my question was about the LBR. And when you were talking about break, you said that you should wait like max a day. And sometimes all it takes is a bathroom break. But I was wondering, like, how do you gauge that? What if it's like a really intense conversation and like a break just makes you think of like more responses that are like more negative? Like, why just a day instead of longer?
Hi, Riva. It's good to see you here. I think in general, that's what you want to get to. But I think anything that's really hairy and a big one, we found that even if you just give a little bit, something to revisit after that bathroom break, it's not that you're going to, I mean, there's topics, trust me, there's topics that are heavy, that are, you know, maybe very personal. It's not going to be solved with an overnight sleep. But I think the point is to try to share something in that 24-hour window, and it could even be an email. I mean, I've left here in different places and stormed out, you know, and then I email, I'm like, later on, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with this. And it could just be as little as that. It's just not to leave too much space between the really big bomb or the big thing that was brought up. And then, because the challenge is, it's very hard to go back to it if you leave too much space. I mean, it's already hard enough. So to revisit it too far after the incident happens, it makes it harder for the other person. I found out I can make it actually harder for Charlie to bring it back up with me the longer it goes. It's like, you know, it's what we call, you're kind of walking on eggshells around people. You can feel it building up. So you make it harder for the other person to bring it up. So this is, I think, a big part of why, but we're not suggesting that these big problems get solved with a good night's sleep. That's just not the case, right?
The thing I was going to say was this: the assumption, it's not LBR and then you're done, solved. It's more like LBR now goes back to L, so you can go through this process again. And I think Megan's point is right. This whole idea of the eggshell building, I cannot tell you how deadly that is, right? You know, the next day you come and the person doesn't bring up like nothing happened. You know how I feel? Oh, really? So I'm the only one bothered? You must be stronger than me. Is that what you think? Well, fuck you, right? Does that come out loud? No, that's all silent voice, right? Well, and so now I'm going to act extra chipper, right? Extra chipper and stuff. Now there's the LHF coming in, right? Nothing's wrong with us, right? But it is deadly. We operate with this grudge in our back of our head that's unresolved. Unresolved, unprocessed stuff do the most lethal damage. And then when the damage occurs, you have to unravel and unpack what the hell happened. And you realize, oh my God, it came down to that conversation we didn't finish. So this aspect, and I think to Megan's point, is just too easy to procrastinate it. And oftentimes a lot of people will say, you know, it's amazing in buildings, we take so many elevators. You know, the insight usually comes as you're going down the elevator. Like it's almost like coming down from your emotions. You're getting all up, and then as soon as you're in the elevator going down, you're like, oh my God, I think I heard what they said. I get their point. I might not agree with it, but I think I heard it. But then nobody knows you did that. And so you come back up the elevator, right? You're acting like, I'm so happy, had a great weekend, right? And they're like, you, right? So kupucha monkeys, right? But in quiet happening.
Got it. Find an elevator.
Question here? Sure.
We got a question in New York.
Sure. I'll bring a mic.
So I want to take it back to your Boeing 737 example, and particularly for you, Charlie, thinking back to when you first started the company and, you know, when you rebuilt it after the dot-com bust. What are your thoughts regarding transparency and open book management, at least early on? So that financial information, the reason I bring that up is because, you know, for the entrepreneurs in the room, when you're just getting started and you're trying to avoid those 737 situations, how important is it to share, you know, how you're building your company out financially with that early team, whether it be consultants or people that you're bringing on, so that you can, you know, not have those accidents happen. You get buy-in.
So first, one of the big dangers is this: if you take any piece of advice black and white, I mean, I guarantee you're going to like be really hurt. So you have to kind of put all these things. It's almost like with people, everything's like heart surgery. The tweaks and the adjustments do matter. So the thing don't make everything transparent everywhere all the time by default. That's not the right answer. But there's a power in transparency. So I'll give you a quick story from my side. When I was way back in, I mean, we have many days of going from kind of success to like almost nobody. There was a window we got to, I think we only had like 14 employees, where we pretty much were running out of, we were running out of money. See, optimist, right? Pretty much 3 days away from running out of money. That's usually people call running out of money. We're running out of money. And Greg, who's in Boston, was our CFO then, which kind of tells you some of the problems between us. We're both optimists together. But running out of money, and it was like Wednesday, we're out of money by Friday. And thought, like, at least we should tell them, right? And so Greg went up and he showed our financial picture. The revenue's been going down, expenses have been going up, and our cash balance is literally from here to zero by Friday, right? And now Charlie will tell you why we're going to stay though. Right? So I like gave my first business plan pitch to these 14 employees, but I expected everyone to leave. So Greg and I, and at the senior level, we went to the door just to greet everyone, and they all just sat there in shock, right? I mean, I'm sure I can't imagine what thoughts are going through their head, but like, you assholes, to like, I mean, who knows what. But I expected everyone to leave, and I kind of was bracing for a hit or a punch or something. First person came up saying, I've never had someone be so honest with me. I can't believe you told me all that. And so I think I'm going to stick around, right? And if you raise money from what you're showing, pay me back, but I'll take that risk. Every single person stayed. So from that day onwards, this is going way back. It was like 98 or 90, I think it was 98. We've kept financials open book. So every Monday, every employee gets to see the rhythm of the company. It has its pain, downsides. I mean, I'm jealous of people who run companies where the company is doing badly and I know it because I'm mentoring them and coaching them. The employees have no clue, right? Because they just don't know. They sense something's wrong, a lot of closed door meetings and stuff, but they have no clue. Versus everyone here, like, not only has a clue, they are projecting the trending clues. And so it's like you have to deal with all that too. So there's issues that come with it, but I found in general, in my lowest of points, and I always tell this to Meghan, I err on sharing it. Now, it might not be the whole company, at least my senior team, I share it. And my point to Meghan, being the optimist, is because when we win, it's going to be a lot better having come from this point. Because I like to share it usually after we win, but then it's like, do you know how bad it was? No one quite knows. So when I'm feeling the terror of everything bad, the team is feeling the pins and needles of that. And then when we traverse and bring it up, which doesn't happen all the time, but when we do, they like appreciate not only the transparency, because they now know, like, good or bad, you're telling me the truth. Usually when you say good, it's not telling the truth. When you share bad, you know they're telling you the truth. So I found in the long run, it helps. But in the short run, it's wrought with risk. Because we have had cases where I've shared stuff, people just fled right away. Another question, Boston?
Hi there, my name's Christine and I am from Liberty Mutual Insurance. And I was hoping that you could give some advice on how to use some of these science-based things that you talked about today, like the ladders of inference and LBR, with somebody that isn't in the room today. So how do we make this real to have more effective conversations?
You know, there's one thing I was going to share in this ladders of inference that kind of has helped. So it's funny, we're helping BK, who's the head of HR in the Air Force. They're doing this whole thing with promotion categorization change, right? It's created an uproar and all this stuff. So we're trying to help them a little bit on this. But I think it was Simon Sinek who also shared this, the idea of the circle of safety versus the idea of danger outside. Safety. And most people look at these conversations as one step. And in fact, you don't even realize what you're doing, which is you are trying to process the data and then figure out how to narrate it all at the same time. And so what we walked him through was separate this task. The first thing you want to do is the idea of the LBR, right? Meaning it is not about the optics of what I'm going to share out, but I am just going to focus on getting the full truth. So in this case of the Air Force promotions, the discussion that he was trying to tell us, like, it's all good. And I was like, there's no freaking way it's all good, right? But they're getting resistance, right? So Goldfein's upset and everyone's upset. Like, go find out how to figure out how to communicate it better. And I was like, well, I read your PowerPoint. It sounds all rosy and all good, but unless the Air Force is allowed to have more positions promoted than the other services, you're just shuffling the things. So it's the same amount of promotions. So somebody's getting screwed. Someone's getting a benefit. Can you put that stuff on the table? Now, you don't want to put it out for everyone in the Air Force, but within your close circle, you need to put both the good and bad, all sides of the argument on the table so you can look at it. You might need to put it on the wall, marinate with it. You will at some point figure out how to narrate it, how to communicate it. But what happens is we are usually meshing the gathering of information, the sense making, with the decision or how we're going to communicate it, and it's like coming out all wrong. So I don't know if
maybe this helps too, Christine. I think that when you think about the science, just so you know, like, the science has been pulled together from different places over 20 years, and there's not one piece by itself that we think works by itself, meaning like the LBR, for example, and you're going to experience this tomorrow. You're going to experience trying ladders of inference, even when you do the team challenge. You're going to experience LBR. Your break is going to be sleep class. But all of it being pulled together is what we're trying to do. And so, for example, on the LBR, bringing it to light is something that we learned from Jim Lear, who's one of the best performance coaches in the world, wrote 18 bestseller books. He talked about bringing it to light, but for us, we always talked about truth. But this framework came about over years where we just through experience have found how we operate. We need a break and then to revisit. So a lot of it we've built. And so I don't know if you're asking kind of the documentation of it and how you can pull all the science together, document it,
right,
and then teach it. That's something that we haven't fully done yet. A big part of doing that is what we're teaching you now. So the goal of everything we're doing is to document it so we can teach it, simplify it so it gets adopted.
Meghan makes a really good point.
Matters.
There's so many experts out there who spent their lives writing books and whatnot, but oftentimes they don't realize they just found a piece of the puzzle. But the pride in authorship, they argue like this solves all. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. We found it's only a piece of the puzzle. Jim Lear gave us to bring it to light. There's another guy named Josh Wakeskin, whose movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, chess champion, right? Wrote books as well. He actually taught us about the power of the subconscious mind and what's happening, how it's solving problems. And it's despite you now doing something else, like eating a snack or walking or even working out, it's actually processing everything. And so when we combine those things and then we revisit it, which we learned from somebody else too, but like is when we start to realize the power of the stuff. So a lot of these things, a lot of the researchers by themselves is only one piece of the puzzle, not enough to succeed.
More question in New York? There is?
Got one back here.
Hey, I'm Lloyd. So the question I have is related to like the V1 through V7 to where you get the innovative change to like stick. The problem I've got in the military specifically, my example would be we do this exercise, is Red Flag Alaska. It's huge. And up until a couple of years ago, it was essentially we were fighting like the Gulf War at best. Like it was old because change is extraordinarily extraordinarily difficult in the military because every 3 years we move. At best, like the longest I've ever held a position is like a year and a half. So at best we get to like V3 of like whatever it is, and then somebody else takes over and they start over. And now I've got 4 different people's V1 through 3 that I'm dealing with. Have you seen that? And how do you just like scrap it or use what they've got and make that all into a better version to go forward when you've got so many different versions of the same thing trying to innovate?
So Meghan always says this, which I love. You have to find a way to remember, primary is 51%, secondary is like 49 or less. Make your brand and your ego secondary and make the need of the team, the enterprise, primary, which is a lot harder to do than you think. Meaning, who cares about whose idea it was? But when we look as the top leadership, we're always looking for momentum, right? Things that have momentum, because you know what we tend to fall prey to? We tend to fall prey to V0 thinking that there's momentum, right? Because someone else did it, research backed it, right? Momentum in my like tribe, in my organization is what matters most. When something has momentum, so the way I always look at it is this: 2 data points, I always say, makes a trend. 3 data points makes a strong trend. So I'm going to work backwards. Anything with a strong trend is where I'm going to pour more into, right? And if they got a strong trend with very little resources, if I put my senior team and resources on it, we can accelerate it even more and put a dedicated team to get it to a V7. But if I don't have that, then I notch down and say, okay, is there anything with a trend? More than one data point, 2 data points of success. And so you want to find these within the same category, the same project, anything that actually has momentum. So think of a sports coach. Oftentimes, sports coaches have a plan on how to win the game, but only the really bad ones stick to those plans. They have the agility that they're looking at what's happening. And based on the momentum and the trends of even by player and plays that work, they will change their game plan to where the momentum is. So that whole process we call, there's a whole other thing I was going to add, which Meghan took away, but it was called alertness before you go into identify the momentum and then you go aggressive action into the momentum. It's a good question. It's a great question. The only part I was going to say, by the way, to also add is the 3 years, a year and a half. So we have this conversation all the time with every leader of the military. You know, in at least the US, the national average of tenureship for most employees in a job is 18 months now. The average tenureship of a C-level executive is no more than 2 years. So that's across our industry. In tech, it's even worse. The average tenureship at Google, Amazon, Facebook, the top tech companies is less than a year. So my argument to the military is you have more tenureship. You have more longevity because despite even moving command, you're at least still staying within. But even just within a command, you still have it better than what most companies have. So it's still a problem, but I'm just saying you have it better. All right, we'll let you get lunch, and then I think we'll do 10X at 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so.
Yep. Before we get lunch, though, we're going to ask to take a couple minutes to leave feedback, please. So if you could, in both Boston and New York, if you could take your feedback note pads and leave feedback. Here in New York, there's a collection box in the back of the room. I'll let the Boston team, let the folks in Boston know where that is. But please take a couple minutes before you grab lunch. Leave some feedback for Charlie and Meghan's presentation, and then